Hi guys, Ted Elsner, Sacramento Historical Fencing Academy. It is time for the fifth and final rule of the Rostock. In this case, it is the rule of the diagram number 5. This rule is actually kind of simple in its basic kind of presentation, but really complex and insightful, not only for fencing with a rapier, but fencing with all weapons, especially with a longsword. So let's take a look at it. The fifth and final rule of the diagram. Drive your work first to the weak, then to the strong, then to the body. So there we have it, right? That's actually quite easy. Fence to the weak, to the strong, to the body. But what does he mean by that? We actually interpret this as a reference to measure more than anything else. Fencing to the weak of the opponent's blade, then fencing to the strong of their blade, and finally fencing to their body. Now, fencing to the strong and to the body is what we've done through all of the rules up until this point. We've basically got ourselves into an advantageous bind where we're in that strong distance, gaining their blade before we then attack their body, which means we can look specifically now at what it means to fence to the weak. This is where things start to get quite complex because there's a number of different tactical choices that we can make at this point. We can start to look at things in both the vor and the knock. We can start to think about things like counter guards, counter positions, and also how to respond to somebody if they're already point in line. If you're a rapier fencer, this is actually going to be something that you've spent probably a fair amount of time with. Rapier fencers actually are pretty intuitive when it comes to weak to strong to body. When your opponent is pointing their blade directly at you, you have to deal with the weak. You don't have a choice. Longsword fencers, though, because of our tendency to hang out in one of the 4 primary guards with that point back, often ignore the weak. So for instance, maybe Jeff is hanging out in something like a shoulder Vomtag position. Perfect, right? What we'll see happen a lot of times is ignoring of the weak distance and trying to attack straight to the strong or straight to the body. So what happens in that kind of scenario? If I decide that I think that I can attack straight through that into the body, I'm going to run into some problems, right? I throw that cut at Jeff, bam, and he's going to end up either cutting into my head, getting a overbind, something that is going to ruin my day. The reason for it being that I've attacked straight to his body. And so what we need to do is back it up and start to think about how we play that game in the week. This actually starts to get into a really interesting question that in a future video, we're going to go into some of our personal kind of interpretations and thoughts on it, but let's take a little bit of a look at it now. The first part of it is, if I'm going to fence to the weak, I can start off by doing that through counter guards. Now, if I see that Jeff goes into a particular position, and it doesn't matter what he is, okay, so he's in shoulder Vomtag. I want to constrain that position. How do I go about constraining it? Well, I either want to invite him to attack along a line I expect, or close off his line of attack. So maybe I come in and I present myself in fluke. I'm inviting him to attack my upper left opening, but I've got my point in line and I'm creating a much shorter distance for me to respond to his attack. So if he was then silly enough to attack into this space, a simple extension into long point as an absetzen, a gaining of the overbind, a pressing up into the outer circle, and a wind and a strike gets me where I need to be. Awesome. Conversely, I might find myself in this position deciding I want to kind of do a counter guard and close off that line. And maybe I come in to my own kind of ox. Well, where's he going to attack from? If he decides to attack into my upper left opening, okay, well, that's closed. That's fine. If he attacks somewhere else, I have a very easy time of simply winding out into a long point-like position, gaining the overbind, and working to the opening. Now, I don't know if you saw it in there, but we kind of set up a possible set of actions that occurred. When he goes up into ox, I could choose to crump, but maybe he gets there first. So instead, I can Shielhow into that and close that line off. Where's he going to come? He's going to have to move. And we fence to the weak. So at this point, as he moves to the strong, I'm given an opportunity to come in and bind if he goes into this position. I've got an overbind. I like it at this point. I can press and wind from there. So we're going to come back to this rule a lot. It's going to be one that as we go into the implications of all of these rules that we spend a lot of time with. There's a whole tactical theory that starts to arise out of it, of how we penetrate to the center, we flank to the side, and otherwise really control our opponent and attack into them. Another thing that we can look at for this is if he's hanging out in a long point position, right? This is where kind of our rules of disengaging and how to deal with that come into play, and coming in with the weak and gaining overbind. If he's just here in a straight point on, if I try and come in, oh, right, he changes. So fencing to the weak at this point. I can play around with that, and I can be smart. I can come in with my short edge. So when he disengages underneath, right now I get to move in from my weak to my strong. I've gained a beautiful overbind, and now to the body, right? So we can play around with that as well. Disengaging at that weak distance is an important part of this, where we can really start to control and deceive him. By our choices, we can either give him an advantageous overbind on ourselves, or more importantly, we can set him up for failure in how we want to respond. Anyway, guys, though, this was just a short video because this is a short rule and relatively easy to understand. In our next video that's going to come out, we're going to talk about the poem that Meyer gives to finish off the diagram. And he's going to give us a little bit more important detail. Once we finish that up, then we're going to go into all the implications of what the rules really start to tell us, and now we can start to deduce certain things from them. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, witty remarks, down there in the comments. Otherwise, guys, hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to us so that you can follow us whenever we have a new video coming out. Like us on Facebook, and we'll see you next time. Make sure to get there. Train safe. Bye-bye.